Hi students, this video is going to show you how to write the fifth overall paragraph for your war essay, also known as the fourth body paragraph or the last body paragraph for your essay. So far for the outline, we have completed the introduction, first body paragraph, second body paragraph, which reviews the causes and outcomes of the war, and the third body paragraph, which talked about the opposition position. Now we will be moving on to the fourth body paragraph, which is where you clarify your position on the essay and convince your readers to agree with your position. Again, if you would like to access this outline so that you can look more closely at these paragraphs, please go to Moodle and you can find the outline there. If you have trouble, just send me an email and I can shoot the link directly to you. So let's start our fourth body paragraph, fifth paragraph overall, and let's start with the topic sentence. So let's take a look at this topic sentence. It reads, despite the many reasons World War I occurred, the war's devastating loss of life and connection to the start of World War II prove that it was an unnecessary war that should have been prevented. So this topic sentence does a couple important things, just like all the topic sentences we've reviewed so far. So for instance, it starts with the words, despite the many reasons World War I occurred. So this is transitioning from the previous paragraph to this paragraph. So in the previous paragraph, which was the opposition argued that World War I was necessary. And so this transition is acknowledging the fact that we just talked about reasons why the war had to occur. However, we're also indicating the fact that we disagree with that opposition's position. And we communicate that through using the word despite, which means that even though this is true, we don't agree that World War I should have happened. So make sure that you start with your topic sentence with a transition that links your previous paragraph to the next, showing how the paragraphs will build upon each other and relate to one another. That helps your reader understand what the essay is telling them. Then the topic sentence reads, the war's devastating loss of life the war's devastating loss of life. So that is going to be the first point that I make in the evidence of this paragraph, and connection to the start of World War II. That will be the second piece of evidence that I bring in. So again, make sure that your thesis outlines the two pieces of evidence that you will have in this paragraph, and make sure that it is in the order that you will present that evidence. Then, last but not least, my topic sentence says, prove that it was an unnecessary war that should have been prevented. This is where I clearly state my position for the essay overall. This links all the way back to my thesis, where I state that the war was not necessary. So I'm going back to my overall thesis, and I'm reminding readers in my topic sentence here what my essay is ultimately about, and that is proving that the war was unnecessary. So make sure that your topic sentence does these things. It should transition. It should introduce your first point of evidence. It should introduce your second point of evidence. And it should relate back to the thesis, establishing the overall purpose of the essay and what it will prove. Excellent. Let's move on to our first piece of evidence. So let's take a look at the evidence, the first piece of evidence for this paragraph. It's a fairly long piece, and it gives a ton of data right at the readers. So it reads, as stated before, World War I resulted in 17 million deaths, but looking even further into the number will reveal additional horrifying facts. For instance, of that 17 million, 10 million were soldiers and 7 million were civilians. In addition to those deaths, 21 million soldiers were wounded, often resulting in amputations and severe psychological stress. These deaths and casualties affected all countries involved, including Germany, that had the highest number of military deaths with 2.1 million fatalities, Russia, that had the highest number of deaths with 3.8 million civilians and military deaths, France that lost 11% of their population in war, and Serbia that lost 16.11% of its population in the war. And then there's the in-text citation with the author's last name. So this evidence does a couple of important things. First off, it has an entire sentence dedicated to transitioning. So first, the evidence says, as stated before, World War I resulted in 17 million deaths. The 17 million deaths fact has been repeated at least twice, if not 3 times, in the essay previously. So this is relating back to an important number that has been central in proving the position of the essay. So it brings that number back and then explains that this paragraph is going to look even further into this number to reveal just how horrifying World War I was. So this sentence acts as a transition that relates to the earlier portions of the essay and then explains how those earlier portions of the essay will relate to this paragraph in particular. So we have transitioning that's clearly explaining to the readers what they should get out of this evidence. Then we have a transition, for instance, which indicates that we're going into the factual information that was researched online. Then there is a slew of data about the war. And so the author's decision to put all of this data in here is to kind of force the readers to see just how devastating the war was. It talks about soldiers' deaths, civilians' deaths, the injuries, the outcomes of the injuries, and how each country was severely affected, sometimes even losing 16% of its population. So we can see all this information. And next, the elaboration will explain why this information is significant, just in case readers can't figure it out on their own. And last but not least, don't forget to put your author's last name in the in-text citation. So for instance, the information in that evidence came from this website, and here's the author. So I took her last name, and I put it in the in-text citation. So next, let's take a look at how the elaboration works, which follows our first piece of evidence. All right, students, let's take a look at the elaboration. Note that the elaboration is also very long. That's because the evidence is long. If you have evidence that is this long, you should really have elaboration that at least matches the length of the evidence. If you have this much evidence and then only a sentence or two of elaboration, then you have not used all of the evidence that you presented. So the options are either limit the evidence to what you just need, or if you need all this evidence, then you need to talk about all the evidence you've given. So let's take a look at how that's done. So this elaboration reads, if this data is difficult to comprehend, consider that North Carolina's population is currently 10 million. So first we have our transition, if this data is difficult to comprehend. So this transition is relating to all this data here. And it's being very frank. This was a lot of data. So the essay is saying, if you don't really understand what this means, let me tell you. And it creates a comparison. Consider that North Carolina's population is currently 10 million. Now I got that information from here, which is from the United States Census Bureau. So I need to make sure that I cite that. Even though it's not in my evidence, I researched it. So I need to put a citation after it. So population estimates. So I'll go here and I'll add in another in-text citation that says population estimate. Okay? Now I go into my individual ideas that I came up with myself. So I say, therefore, a transition to explain why this is important. The number of soldiers who died equals the population of our entire state. So I complete the comparison by saying the population of North Carolina equals the number of soldiers who died in the war. And that is hopefully to help my readers understand just how devastating the war was by having them picture everyone in their entire state dying. And that's pretty extreme. So then the essay says, this comparison does not even include the 7 million civilians, including women and children who died from bombings, disease, and starvation caused by the war. So this explains the significance of the facts from here, that 7 million were civilians. It shows that this is significant because these were women and children who were not involved in the war, but who died anyway. And then the elaboration goes to say, ultimately, that's a transition, if a person lives in one of the involved European countries, there is no way to hide from the destruction of the war. And this goes to show the significance of these facts, which show that each country that was majorly involved in the war lost a lot of lives. And so this shows the significance of that information. So as you can see here, I go through each piece of information and show why it's significant. And then I go in and make sure that my elaboration shows my opinion of this matter clearly. This remained true even after the war, when the 21 million wounded soldiers returned home ruined by the war, unable to integrate back into their families, their profession, and their daily lives. World War I destroyed an entire generation by killing them or by ruining their futures, making the world leaders' decision to enter World War I over economy and land disputes wrong and unnecessary. So here, my opinion is made very clear that World War I destroyed a generation, making the war ultimately unnecessary. The war, the positive outcomes of the war, were not worth the negative outcomes of the war. Now, if you take a look at what I've written, this is a lot of writing. Adding on further evidence, elaboration, and a wrap-up would cause this paragraph to become too long. Therefore, I would make the executive decision as the writer to start a new paragraph. So to indicate that, I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to put a line here to show that my position section is actually going to be 2 paragraphs, because I have so much information to share that I need 2 paragraphs to fulfill everything I want to do in this section. So if your paragraph is starting to look really long, start a new paragraph after your first piece of elaboration. Do not start a new paragraph after your first piece of evidence. That doesn't make sense as a natural break. You still need to talk about that evidence. So if you need to divide a long paragraph into 2, the natural division for that new paragraph will happen after the elaboration. So now I'm going to write my next piece of evidence, elaboration, and the wrap-up, and then we'll go through and look at how my second paragraph within this section would look. Alright, so let's take a look at what will be the second paragraph of my position section. So remember, you do not have to have 2 paragraphs in this position section, but once you've started writing, if you realize that with the information you have and with what you want to say, you need to have 2 paragraphs, I highly encourage you to do that. It will make your paper stronger, and it will make your paper more convincing, which is what we're looking for. So I'm not going to go over each section in complete detail because we should know at this point how it works. But if you do start a second paragraph, you need to make sure that this new paragraph has a very clear transition so that your readers understand what the purpose of this paragraph is, because it's somewhat unexpected. So the beginning of this paragraph would read, additionally, so this shows that this paragraph is adding on to the previous paragraph. The loss of lives that destroyed a generation did not fade gradually after 1918, but rather directly caused the next World War and therefore further devastation. So here we can see this sentence of transition connects this paragraph that we'll talk about the next World War, or World War II, to what we talked about in the previous paragraph, which is about the destruction of a generation. So remember, with transitions, you mention what the purpose of the previous paragraph was about, and you connect it by showing how it relates to what your next paragraph is going to be about. And that's how you do a transition. So then you can go through and read this yourself, but this provides information as to how World War II was caused by World War I, and it has its in-text citation, and all this information is paraphrased, which is why it's not in quotation marks. Then it has the following elaboration that explains the significance of World War I causing World War II. Then the wrap-up is important. It says, therefore, World War I was an unnecessary war because the horrifying outcomes cannot be justified by any other cause or result of the war. It's important that you have your transition and then clearly state your position so that readers understand what you have just proven. That's critical. Clearly state your position and then end with elaboration to make your position even more convincing.